case bar ready. Yeah, going to jail for our sins. Again, it all comes back to the autism. This person is delusional, okay? And I don't mean that in a negative way. If somebody tells you about something called the dimensional merge and how they are Jesus Christ and they went to jail and suffered for your sins, that is delusional, okay? And that's one of the things that shows you how detached this individual is from reality. But what comes next is probably what I have been saying since this whole saga had began.
That I was proven innocent, and they couldn't place me anywhere, which is why they kept me in jail for so long, because they didn't know what to do with me. They didn't know what to do with somebody was freaking autistic, and you weren't putting your words in. They didn't know what to do. They just kept me in jail. They didn't know where to place me.
So again, I actually do agree. Now, when it comes to innocence, obviously charges, it appears the entire case has been dismissed. But the more and more I looked into it, one of the actual proceedings that came out of the 9th August 2022, one of them was for a motion for autism disorder deference, okay? So for those of you who don't understand, I'm going to read here. This I believe to be the case. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Deferred disposition in a criminal case, persons with autism or intellectual disabilities. In any criminal case, except a violation of 18.231, an act of violence as defined in 19.297.1, or any crime of which a deferred disposition is provided for by statute upon a plea of guilty or after a plea of non-guilty, and the facts found by the court would justify a finding of guilt, the court may, if the defendant has been diagnosed by a psychiatrist or clinical psychologist with 1, an autism spectrum disorder, which obviously Chris Chan has, 2, an intellectual disability as defined in 37.2-100, and the court finds by clear and convincing evidence that the criminal conduct was caused by or had a direct and substantial relationship to the person's disorder or disability without entering a judgment of guilt and with the consent of the accused after giving due consideration to the position of the attorney for the Commonwealth and the views of the victims, defer further proceedings and place the accused on probation subject to terms and conditions set by the court. Upon violation of a term or condition, the court may enter an adjudication of guilt or upon fulfillment of the terms and conditions. The court may discharge the person and dismiss the proceedings against him without an adjudication of guilt. This section shall not limit the authority of any juvenile or domestic relations court related to in Title 16.1. So, from what I believe, I don't know if it's necessarily the court proving you innocent. First of all, I don't even think that's an actual judgment. It's usually guilty or non-guilty. I don't even think innocence is even brought up in the courts. But when it comes to this specific deference, I believe that the court probably put Chris Chan into some sort of like a probationary system, and as long as they played along, this would get dismissed. That's from what I believe. Again, I'm not a legal expert, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. So again, one thing as well, Chris Chan agrees that obviously the legal system didn't know where to place them, and I do agree with that. This is a very, very special case. So obviously for the state of Virginia, they probably had no idea what the fuck to do. So again, they just kept this person in prison, and eventually when the charge ran to the point where the time that they have already served would have outweighed any potential sentence, there's no reason keeping them. Let them go off, go to a halfway house, get reintegrated into society, and then wash your hands of all of this. I think that's the most likely scenario that has happened. Again, I'm not a legal expert, but reading through court cases and reading through legalese in order to come to the best possible conclusion, I think I've reached it.
But yeah, in that, Bella was the real sex criminal in that. She really wanted to try to get me in something. She's the real criminal. Fucking bitch! Calling her out! Call her out!
So in this one, Chris Chan ends this pretty much off with like, yeah, this person's the real criminal, which is again where the, I guess you could say, eyes have shifted to. But yeah, Chris Chan is basically back, and this isn't the only time that they've thrown this Isabella person under the bus, obviously. In one of the actual arcs that they have drawn from jail, they mentioned Bella, and of course, even in a jail letter, they mention, hey, rest assured, a lot more than karma shall bite Bella's ass around Judgment Day. Also, numerology-wise, 13 is not as unfortunate as most consider it to be. Neither is 666. 1 plus 3 equals 4 from the 13. And repeating sixes are actually a message. Okay, alright. Let's stop. God damn it. Insanity. But of course, from prison, they had basically even told that I played a bit of basketball in the rec room, but the rec room had been restricted for me for a while. So I wish is also a response. The library is not large enough for D&D. Yes, I like to read, and I have considered eventually becoming a DM for a group. Money? Pretty much, yeah. No video game handhelds or consoles on offer. Yeah, prison exactly wasn't the fun environment, but given how much Chris Chan has been cussing recently, I think prison has truly changed this individual into a much, I guess you could say, street individual in a way. I think they've discovered some street smarts, okay? I think they discovered the real gritty side that was within them, okay? That's all I'm going to put out there. Now, I tried looking more into the case, but it seems like the case was sealed, according to one of the lawyers, Chris Chan's, public attorney, because there was so much intense legitimate and illegitimate external interest about Ms. Chandler. Greene County is a small rural place. In a unique situation like this, there's case authority attached to keep all pretrial matters sealed so that it will later be possible to select a local jury for a fair trial if and when this is needed. Which I don't think is necessarily going to be the case because, again, it seems like everything is dismissed and it's done. Now, you might be wondering, how was there never any case done against this person? Again, I looked at the actual autism difference, but also, it may have been just a difficult case to prove. Again, there is a lot of unreliable narrators in this situation. And when you involve with family, I don't know what testing happened. I don't know if family recanted certain things. Whatever it was, it didn't go to any trial. It didn't end up going to a judgment, and Chris Chan never had to go to a actual prison and be properly formally charged. If anything, it seems like they were just detained for quite a long time. Now, does that mean it's the end of the saga? Honestly, yeah. As much as Gino Samuel's gonna hate the fact that he has to keep goddamn fucking making these documentary pieces, Chris Chan has come out, and it seems like whoever they've partnered with seems to be helping them make a goddamn killing. Now, this is a Sonichu medallion that's currently being sold for $64. And if you go to the official Quick Mart, bros, 2,629 sales. Now, if you did an average unit cost price of like $50, let's just do it real quick. Calculator.
So you know why they're doing this, right? They suspect that he's like a sociopath killer sex guy who's killed someone or fucked his mother or whatever the fucking weird shit. And they're hedging their bets in the weird internet scenes because they have all that Bitcoin money and stuff to throw around on collectibles in case they ever blow up. And if Chris Chan goes to jail, that's 65. If he goes to jail for something else, that fucking medallion becomes worth like, $30,000 or something. And this is why they buy him for $65. And he's not stupid to sell him for that. Jesus Christ, man. Piece of crap medallion for $65. Better get a fucking... No, I'm just going to leave it at that.
2,600 times 50 is a per unit price. Chris Chan is revenuing in the $130,000, okay? Now, does that mean all these Etsy orders are going to get filled? Probably not. But right now, Chris Chan has earned some serious goddamn money out of it. And whoever they're working with, maybe they're keeping them on track, but Chris Chan
Your skill has increased.
Producing new art, producing God knows what. But again, ladies and gentlemen, to come back to all of it, do I believe Chris Chan's framing of the story? Honestly, yeah, I would say maybe. Just because Chris Chan is an autistic
Your skill has increased.
After I've mulled it over in my head, the only actual evidence the internet had was their own admission. But being that Chris Chan is an unreliable narrator,
Your skill has
I can
increased.
trust what they said. Because in my head, they may have said everything they did about fucking their mom to sound cool. And if that sounds weird to you and me, because, whoa, Muda, how does that sound like a cool thing to do? This person has autism, okay? Social disorders. What you and I think is weird, they don't have any proper grasp of, okay? So I think that may necessarily have been the case. Maybe Chris Chan was guilty of the crime that they committed. Honestly, the world will never know, because the prosecution behind it has sort of stopped. And I don't know why everything is sealed, but at the end of it, this marks the end of the Chris Chan jail saga. But again, given this person's propensity to constantly be online and post every single detail about their life, you can imagine this story will never properly end. It seems like at least now Chris may be a little bit more financially stable if they keep up to their work ethic, so maybe they can keep themselves sustained for a little bit. But yeah, this is the end of the story. Honestly, it's never going to be a good ending, because even if you are innocent, the Court of Public Opinion has completely vilified you. The connections that Chris Chan had in the industry or to people around them have completely blocked this individual, and whatever life they once had and enjoyed has shifted for something that they have no real certainty of. It's truly a pretty dark moment, and honestly, witnessing this felt like watching and witnessing a very dark corner of the internet resurface. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and I'm a little bit blown away that this is happening, honestly. And the only reason I have interest into it is because I've been following this for quite a long time, out of, again, morbid curiosity. Ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mutahar, and yeah, I'm out. Hello guys and gals, me Mutahar. I think I'm gonna make some Sweeney boys and girls a little bit mad, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I like video gaming, as you know. I play on the PlayStation, the Xbox, the Switch, the PC, the Mac. Alright, shit, I might even bring up an Apple Watch and sometimes game on that too, if you could. But ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to video gaming, I have no allegiances. I just play good stuff, okay? Now, Spider-Man 2 is a game that's been breaking the records, 90 plus on Metacritic, and it is kind of, I would say, deserving of it. It's a pretty good game, and the reason I'm talking about it is I just finished it. This is Spider-Man 2. I got it a day or two early. I have about 26, 27 hours in the game. I kind of no-lifed this, straight up, to be honest with you. Finished it about 2 hours ago, and really had time to sort of script out and collect and write out my thoughts. It is not a perfect game. This game is, honestly, now the more I think about it, it's a little mid. And it's a mid because it is by far one of the safest sequels that I've ever seen to a video game. Now, to understand, I love Spider-Man PS4. I love Spider-Man Miles Morales. I think those are some of the best PlayStation games out there. When Spider-Man dropped on the PS4 at the tail end of its lifespan, I was like, this is a good game. This game looks nice. This is amazing. You know, it's a game that really made you feel like Spider-Man. And honestly, I know that I sound like IGN when I say it, but there's no better way to put it, okay? Spider-Man is about swinging through New York, about beating the crap out of, like, criminals, and, you know, doing some good old Spidey stuff from time to time. Ladies and gentlemen, this game is pretty much that. And I want to start off by saying, I'm going to obviously cut this into, like, you know, pillars of reviews that I would call it. So let's start off with things like the graphics, which I think a lot of people think about when they load up a game. Obviously, it's the first thing you see, and it's what all the console warriors are fighting about. Starfield has one galaxy. Spider-Man has one city. Yeah, the city of New York in Spider-Man 2 is astronomically larger than, I would say, a lot of these infinite open world experiences. It's a very well-crafted experience. It looks very nice. The amount of detail on display is golden. And with the PlayStation 5, there's two options. You can use Fidelity, which is 30 frames, but all the graphic settings are maxed out, not just like visually, but things like the amount of people in the crowd, the vehicles on the road. Everything is cranked up to 11. Then you've got performance mode, which is 60 frames, but obviously some settings and the world detail is pared back. I played the entire game at 30 frames per second, 40 frames when connected to a 120 hertz monitor, and so far, never lost a frame, period, as far as my experience went. It was a very smooth ride all the way through. You might be like, but Muda, why didn't you play it at 60? It's an action game. That's because the 30 frames is actually paced and timed so well that I really didn't feel that level of sluggishness. The game has like 10 out of 10 quality put into it, at least in its visuals. The ray tracing on display is some of the best ray tracing I've seen in gaming, period. Of course, when you're zipping through New York and flying through the reflective walls and the nice, like, interiors and everything, you want to see accurate, proper reflections. And this game has reflections within reflections, which is insane for me to think about. The water has ray tracing reflections on top of it. So what this basically means is everything feels more realistic, but also you start to see less of the illusion breaking around you. Before ray tracing, we had things like screen space reflections, which if you knew what you were looking for, or you occluded sort of like the field from its reflection, then you would basically start to see the cracks in the matrix. With ray tracing, every reflection is there, no matter what, okay? Even if you're not looking at the item that the screen space is supposed to be reflecting, it will be reflected because of the ray tracing attached to it. Obviously, with fidelity, everything is maxed out. It looks gorgeous. You can see ray tracing even into like distant windows. With performance, a lot of cutbacks have to happen, but I think in general playthroughs, most people, when they're playing a game that's all about fast action, won't really notice it. But in reality, what really strikes me about the graphics in this game is how lively New York feels. I don't think that Insomniac was like, thanked enough for how true to life they made New York feel, even with the PS4 version of Spider-Man, Miles Morales. But now that they've got the PS5 and like updated CPUs, they have went out of their way to make the traffic density feel like actual New York. Now when you stop and you look down, it really feels like the original PS2 game, where you were literally just watching a video of like fast traffic on the ground. Here you can see the amount of vehicles in New York, and it feels like New York. There's traffic jams everywhere. Like, being Spider-Man is like a fucking gift from the heavens, because you can just skip the entire traffic problems in New York. The amount of people that you see walk around Times Square is great. The hustle and bustle of New York is alive and well. There were moments where I had my mom come over a day ago and she looked at the game. She was like, damn, is this like a movie? And I'm like, no, Ma, it's a video game. Now, of course, that's just the graphics. Obviously, the music is pretty top tier too, which is no shock. I think the general visual and audio performance of this game is great. The acting is superb. I think that no matter what, anybody that wants to claim it, the game looks well and it looks like a very, very, very premium product. Now, that said, visuals, music is just one term of the gameplay. It's just one tier of a video game. Obviously, the gameplay and what you're doing for 20, 25 hours, which is about how long this game necessarily is, matters the most, right? If the gameplay isn't fun, the game could look like Crysis fucking 1. But that doesn't necessarily make it something that I would go out and recommend you buy, which is where a lot of my complaints from Spider-Man 2 have come out. Now, the storyline is paced really well. I think every single story piece that you go through, it never felt like the game was overstaying its welcome. I played tons of other games in the past, even my favorite superhero games, the Arkham series. I love Arkham Knight, but there are moments in that game where I'm like, all right, can we hurry shit up? Because the credit screen should have happened maybe 2-3 hours ago. There is no point in this game's pacing where I felt like, it's dragging on, all the acting, everything is superb, the story beats hit, it literally goes from point to point to point. Even in those moments in the video game where Peter and Miles, because you play as two Spider-Men, are maybe I should see what's happening around New York, the game will instantly call you right after that dialogue and say, yeah, here's the next story mission. Dog, if you want to commence, feel free to go. So I'm glad that the game gives you that option, it's all there. And if you didn't want to do any of the side content, the storyline, if you basically beeline it all the way through, I think should take you no more than 10, 11 hours. And I'm not even being cute when I say that. It is literally that short. But to an extent, even the original Spider-Man on the PS4 is short. Hell, even other superhero games like the Arkham series are that short. Because if you're not doing side content in a superhero video game, you're kind of playing it wrong. And Spider-Man 2's got a fair amount of side content. You've got, aside from your collectathons, your landmark photos to take, there are a few side villains and side stories you actually go through, which have their own cutscenes, own superheroes, own arcs, that I think kind of add more quality than what you see in the original PS4 release as well. But this is where the cracks start to show up, and I'm going to get real upfront and brutally honest with you. I think this game's progression, I think this game's suit mechanics, I think this game's stealth is a direct pareback from the original. So to start off with, the suits in this game, which there are a lot of, all right, because when you factor in how many suits you get between Peter and Miles, I think there's a little bit more than the original game ever had. But that said, those games were also filled with just one protagonist each. If you factored in Miles Morales, Spider-Man as like separate games with their own separate protagonists, I'm pretty sure they have more cosmetic options there. But the suit unlocks in the original games, PS4 and Miles Morales, PS4, PS5, those games had suit powers, which like every suit had its own sort of power attached to it. And it basically correlated with the design of the suit, the history of the suit, the lore of the suit too. Here, the suits are honestly just cosmetics. There are further unlocks where you can unlock different variants of the cosmetics, so it's the same suit with like different color styles, but there is no suit power attached to it. So a lot of the actual reason that I had to unlock every suit is gone, because aside from like 2 or 3 different cosmetics that I enjoy, if there's no gameplay functionality you're unlocking, what's the point, right? Even if the gameplay functionality was like you replenish items faster, you have an ultimate attack, or there was one in the original game where you could just quip more, the fact that you had extra gameplay features felt like you were getting more than just unlocking a cosmetic. I actually really don't even feel like I have a reason to complete some of the side quests to unlock exclusive suits because there's no gameplay attachment to them. Leveling up in this game is also kind of pared back because in the original game, you level up, you get XP, you level up, you get more health, you get more damage, you get faster traversal speed. In this game, all you get are skill points, which can be used to basically amp up some of your, like, I guess, ultimate attacks, if you will. There are upgrades to your health, your damage, your traversal, but that's all related to the suit powers where you, like, or suit tech, where you build or grind that out. And that's pretty much what it comes down to. The other big pareback is the gadgets. This time there are literally only 5 gadgets if you include your web shooters as well, whereas in the original game you had trip mines, spider drones, gravity complex. You had a bunch of cool things, and I know people that never fuck with that, but I would always unlock almost every single like possible gadget and basically use that. I would literally have like 9 gadgets on play while I was fighting a Spider-Man, and that was on like the harder difficulty for the Spider-Man PS4. You don't really get that. You get 4 gadgets. And yeah, some of them are good, but really it just comes down to spamming all of them when you have them replenished and just using them to like cut down on the hordes of enemies that are fighting. The combat is pretty good. It's there. It's very serviceable. It's fast-paced. There's not a whole lot of enemy variety. Usually it's like standard enemy, enemy with a shield, hit circle, slide under them, knock them into the air, beat the shit out of them. Oh, brute, just parry every once in a while when you see like the big red parry indicators and just continue to wail on them. There's not a whole lot of diversity. The combat is flashy and fun to look at, but I feel like with the amount that they paired back with the gadgets, it's just losing more than you're ever actually gaining. But I think the biggest sin for me in this game is the stealth mechanics. So in the original game, the stealth was really fun. Like, the stealth was built upon. It wasn't like as complex as like, Batman or Metal Gear or Splinter Cell, obviously. But with a superhero game, I like the ability to feel like a predator, like when I have 10 enemies and I'm picking them off one by one. So this game, because it paired back the gadgets like the trip mines and whatnot, you lose that aspect of stealth, but it also gives you a new item, the web line. And you can basically
Your skill has
create
increased.
infinite web lines, and it breaks the stealth so bad that even in this gameplay footage, and I'm going to show it to you, in this one haunt, I can literally create infinite web lines. I can
Your
just
skill
use
has
the
increased.
web shooter to distract one enemy and just keep zipping them up. There's literally no challenge to the stealth in this game. And that's one of the reasons why I feel like Insomniac may not have made stealth one of the biggest focuses for the core gameplay. Because in all the side content, it's a very, 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 very important component if you want to avoid battles and kind of feel like Spider-Man. But the stealth is so trivialized that it just honestly serves better to put me to sleep than actually think and feel like that cool spider predator that I want it to be. And I think this is probably the gravest sin in this game. Now, of course, traversal, the wingsuit, obviously it feels fun to use, super cool. I think the whole fun fact of crossing New York even faster than what I originally did in the PS4 is insane. Definitely that aspect has been upgraded. But overall, after beating it, I'll just be honest and say it, I think Spider-Man 2 is a great game, but it's a very, very safe sequel. And I think they're doing I think this game kind of serves as like a tech demo for Spider-Man 3. I think that Insomniac has finally like really felt comfortable with the PS5. They're starting to do things that are like actually using the raw power of that system. And I feel like Spider-Man 3, because obviously they pretty much set this game up for a trilogy, I think that's where they're really going to show their full cards. But this game, It's fine, it's cool, it's great. I think you'll like it if you buy it. It's a very serviceable title, but ultimately, I think it's an incredibly safe sequel. And it's hard not to think that when you've already been blown away by Spider-Man on the PS4. And this game, while it's nice, doesn't really do a whole heck of a lot to separate itself. And in some ways, I definitely think this game is kind of a step back in terms of its gameplay. Visually, looks great. I think they definitely fucking ruined the stealth. And the combat, I think with the lack of gadgets and the fact that now they have these ultimate abilities, which you can basically hotkey 4 abilities onto your character, they're cool, kind of limited in the beginning. Towards the end of the game, and I'm talking like when you're 90% done with it, by the time Peter gets the symbiote suit, because yes, there's Venom, then Miles and Peter kind of change up and their combat is a little bit more interesting. But honestly, before the first 90% of the main story, just don't really feel like it's all there. That said, though, ladies and gentlemen, overall, I would say pretty decent game, very safe sequel, but it is what it is, you know? Is it deserving of 90 plus on Metacritic? I think this game does what it set out to. It's a good Spider-Man game. I just hope when Spider-Man 3 comes out, Insomniac really, really goes balls in, just like they did when they launched the original Spider-Man on the PS4. That said, though, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and yeah, all I gotta say, I am out. Hello, guys and gals, me Mudahar, and less than 24 hours later, YouTube actually does a response. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is probably the last time I'm ever going to be talking about this. Let's go out with a bang, okay? A firecracker. I've been in kind of meetings all day working on the skincare thing, which is fun. Very hoping to get it all sorted out, but I'll talk about that later. Spider-Man 2 is a great game. I would have babies with the disc, all right? I've seen some people talk about, oh, this game's not 300 hours long, Muda. And I looked at the distant, like, LOD detail. It wasn't sharp enough. I'll be real here. Flying around as Spidey in a wingsuit around New
Your
York,
skill has
Manhattan,
increased.
Queens is where it's at, okay? It kind of reminds me of, like, a game from, like, the, I guess you could say late PS2, like Spider-Man 2 on the PlayStation 2. Obviously elevated to, like, current-gen proportions. The amount of vehicles on the city is insane. The liveliness you see in the city is insane. It actually feels like
Your skill has
New York.
increased.
Like, you go to Times Square in this video game, feels like you're at actual goddamn Times Square, okay? Wet swinging is fun, the combat is cool. My only downside is a lot of the new suits don't actually come with their own powers, so in some ways, it does feel like a little bit of a downgrade, but hey, I'm still working my way through the game. I actually do want to make a full review for that, so maybe in the next couple days, if I can beeline through not just the main story, the side stuff, I'll look into it. Anyways, let's talk about YouTube's response, ladies and gentlemen. So obviously, Sniper Wolf, we've talked about her reaction content. We've talked about her, stalking content towards another creator. We've talked about YouTube's inaction. Today, we're going to talk about YouTube's action, so to speak. Now, YouTube responded quite this morning, okay, around the time I'm headed out for Friday prayers, confirming SS Sniper Wolf has received a temporary monetization suspension. Her creator responsibility policies, off-platform actions that put other personal safety and risks harm to our community, and the behavior on both sides isn't what we want on YouTube. Hoping everyone helps move this convo to a better place. YouTube also, I think, pretty much got her to write this apology because it came out just shortly after. Let me start by saying I'm sorry for my recent actions. It's inexcusable. I'm sorry to Jax Films, YouTube, and the entire creator community. and my incredible fans for not being a better example for appropriate conflict resolution. Whew, god damn. Now, of course, you can read this entire, apology. I don't know if she wrote it, the lawyer wrote it, ChatGPT wrote it, or whether it was a combination of all three. But yeah, she also thanked YouTube for holding her accountable, which is cool, I guess. It's great. But that's pretty much what it came down to. So yeah, finally an apology was issued. That's, honestly, if this was the first thing, if all you had to do was just say, I'm sorry for freebooting content, would have got out of it completely scot-free. Wouldn't even have blown up into a massive issue that this was. Now, to understand what this effectively means is, like I said, she was removed from the YouTube Partner Program temporarily. Now, that could be days, could be weeks, could be months, could be years. But she has been removed. And this isn't the first time this has happened. If you look into YouTube's history, Logan Paul, after his Forest incident, removed from the Partner Program. If you look at creators very recently, Russell Brand, for instance, who actually very recently got suspended from advertiser income. Yeah, YouTube suspended Russell Brand for the creator responsibility policy, which, if you looked at the last video I made about Sniper Wolf, this is exactly what we're talking about, this exact term, where YouTube talks about on-platform and off-platform behavior. If you do things on other platforms like Kick, Instagram, Twitter, whatever, X I guess now in this case, and you make a fool of yourself and you do some really dangerous shit and you promote some really dangerous crap, you know, if you're totally clean and TOS friendly on YouTube, but you're a fucking neo-Nazi on like Twitter, then YouTube's probably not going to want you in their system. Because what effectively happens is you get caught in the media circus known as the news websites that effectively weren't shutting the hell up about Sniper Wolf. And honestly, they shouldn't be because it was such an egregious situation that happened. This is probably one of the top 5 wildest situations in YouTube history. But obviously for creators like Russell Brand, who had gone through something entirely different, which was a string of assault allegations that happened between 2006 and 2013. Now, whether this stuff is entirely true or not, I don't know. Again, when it comes to allegations, I usually leave all of that for law enforcement to handle, okay? Again, that's just, I think, the normal way to do it. But YouTube suspended Russell Brand from the partner program off of those allegations as well. That and the fact that Russell Brand's name was in the media circus. So again, because of the fact that YouTube was getting bad press from it, they pulled away monetization. Now, the reason why this isn't the biggest win for a lot of people who actually wanted justice is for a creator as large as Sniper Wolf, Russell Brand, or Logan Paul, getting your monetization temporarily suspended just means you're on unpaid vacation. You're on an unpaid suspension, ladies and gentlemen, and you might as well fuck off for a little bit, learn to understand yourself and make things right, and then you can come back when you've slowly but silently reintroduced into the partner program. So anyways, enough explanations aside, YouTube removes one of their largest creators after pretty much every single person on the website had issued some sort of dislike. I haven't seen this much vilification on the platform since the days of since years ago. This is like where everyone got along and said, yeah, what Sniper Wolf did was bad, and YouTube pretty much buried their heads in the sand until they really couldn't. See, it's one thing if people on your platform are making constant videos. It's a whole different thing when what happens is the news media, the news websites, the publications constantly make content on you. I feel like YouTube had to issue a response. They were sitting there wondering for days on what to do. And this is about all they really, really wanted to do, period. Now, I still think this isn't necessarily the biggest win in the world because, again, I consider this to be very much unpaid vacation. And considering the kind of content that Sniper Wolf had uploaded, content that I would say is very, very dangerous against the YouTube TOS since the beginning of the website. You know, when you have, like, alleged minors working on camera that you uploaded as part of an Omegle compilation, I'm going to say this for the millionth time. If I uploaded that, God forbid, I would be nuked off the platform. The RCMP would be raiding my fucking house. It'd be that insane. And you know what? That's totally okay. Sniper Wolf uploads it, deletes it, and apparently YouTube will not acknowledge it. But don't worry, the rest of the world very much knows. Now again, I'm just asking for justice in these situations. YouTube, I distinctly remember a while back, there actually were channels that received strikes on deleted videos. Now there was one video uploaded from an account known as Real Rejects that actually apparently claimed to have a video striked even after it was deleted. And according to these chat logs they revealed from YouTube's report, they said, furthermore, as I previously mentioned, we may also issue a community guideline strike on deleted content. Yes, we understand mistakes happen and you don't mean to violate our policy. That's why the first violation is usually only a warning. Note that you'll be warned once, and then this warning will remain on your channel. The next time your content is found to violate the community guidelines, you'll get a strike. So again, it's like the 4-strike rule, 1 being permanent, 3 being temporary. But according to these logs, all right, according to these, it alleges that YouTube will just strike your content even if you remove it. So pray tell, some of these videos that were literally just removed yesterday evening, not even 24 hours ago, which in my opinion, based on what I've read out of the YouTube's TOS, should be strike. Yeah, you're letting one of the largest creators basically get away. And that's probably the only thing that burns me the most. And if I make multiple videos about it, you can imagine why it burns me the most, okay? As somebody that produces content on this website, I pretty much remember these. I tattooed the terms of service literally into my fucking brain. And there are exceptions to the YouTube's terms of services. Like, you can upload content that may violate the community guidelines if it falls under EDSA content, which is educational, documentary, scientific, and artistic content. And of course, even in all of that, you know, the content has to include that, yes, and to do that, you can post content if you're giving basic facts about what is happening in that content. If you are condemning certain pieces of content, like you may be able to cover like seriously like racist material. If you are providing context on why it was bad, you're condemning it, so on and so forth. You discourage things like dangerous behavior. Content that this is more likely to get an EDSA exception. It's not even guaranteed, just more likely. Content that quotes an individual who calls for violence against a group based on their race. The content criticizes and condemns the individual's actions. That's more likely, okay? It's still not a guarantee, more likely. And of course, content that doesn't get a period is things like CSAM material, video still imagery or audio violent assaults, footage filmed by the perpetrator of a deadly or major violent event that shows weapons, violence, and injured victims, unmodified re-uploads of content created by or glorifying violent terrorist or DTO organizations, instructions on how to self-harm, instructions on how to build bombs, instruction on how to manufacture firearms, offering prohibited sales. You can't upload a video that says, hey guys, please come to my cute little dark web Etsy shop and buy a brick of cocaine. That's not okay on YouTube, clearly. Instructions on how to use computers or information technology to compromise personal data. You know, when I make virus investigations or I cover malware, I explicitly cut out steps and leave away sources so that I am not actually teaching people how to commit actual criminal acts using their keyboards and mices, okay? You've got content that reveals an individual's private information, such as their home address, email addresses, sign-ins, phone numbers, passports, or bank account info. And of course, spam, of course. Now, you might be wondering, whoa, Muda, why do you blur a lot of shit out of your videos? That's because I try to make sure I ain't violating content guidelines on the platform, okay? But again, I also could imagine going back to that twerking video I talked about, that probably wouldn't get an EDSA exception, which is exactly why I listed all of these, just to hammer that point in. YouTube should probably look into that. Now, what's more pertinent policy is YouTube's own child safety policy that they have. So if those videos where Sniper Wolf is on Omegle, talking to children or something, and, you know, eventually they twerk and they are children, minors, you know, even if you look at YouTube's examples of what's not allowed, a video featuring minors involved in provocative, suggestive activities, challenges, dares, such as kissing or groping. That's not allowed on YouTube, okay? Now, that's just kissing and groping. I can only imagine how pissed off YouTube should get if you see any alleged minors twerking, okay? That's insanity. But hey, you know, who says that these are all applied, I guess, fairly, right? Jesus Christ. Now again, to sort of dial it all back, one of the last points that I had an issue with over here too was the both sides isn't what we want on YouTube. Clearly YouTube does not enjoy when there's controversy on their platform, that much we know. But YouTube, you can't just do the enlightened centrist on this situation. There's clearly a lot of, there's not nuance really in this situation, I would say. One creator could not handle criticism, so they showed up to another creator's house, ran a poll about, hey, should I show up to their house? Posted an entire frontal image of that house, which, of course, you and I both know can be geolocated if people try hard enough. We know the internet, they can be wild, okay? You can find Shia LaBeouf in a goddamn cornfield. You can find any house that's posted on the internet if you look hard enough. Which again, what happens after that is very much a creator's responsibility if they let people down that breadcrumb trail. In my opinion, at least. And I think YouTube believes in that as well. Because they literally said off-platform actions that put others' personal safety at risk. Now, the other creator, Jax Films in this case, who was literally critical of this person's content, their regurgitated, freebooted content on the internet, I don't understand how this is a both-side situation. What Jax Films was doing was rightfully critiquing this dog water content, but also providing actual sources, actual, like, protections, in a way, to these smaller creators that were getting their shit basically freebooted by Sniper Wolf, Jason Derulo, and every other goddamn freebooter on this platform. Again, I feel like YouTube has kind of like equated this in a way too. Like, yes, being critical of somebody, that's bad. Sure, going to their house and taking a photo of it, a little bit worse than that. In no possible way can anybody look at this and say this is a both sides situation. Again, I'm kind of worried for what this means when it comes to critiquing on YouTube for other creators, other individuals. If I covered somebody like BitBoy Crypto, who basically shills any goddamn crap to his audience, would I be just as bad or guilty if BitBoy showed up to my house and started posting images of it onto the internet? What would YouTube consider? How is that in any realm equal? How is critiquing in any way equal in some capacity to what Sniper Wolf did? Anyways, ladies and gentlemen, YouTube responded. That's all really anybody can say. And I feel like I've gotten... I feel like I got everything off my chest in this situation. Criticism is very important to me on this platform, and you know, making it a good platform is obviously something I enjoy to see. I don't know if YouTube exactly sees eye to eye, but hey, they did something rather than nothing, I guess, which is all anybody can really say. That being said, though, ladies and gentlemen, this is me, Mudahar, and I'm gonna get to hacking a goddamn PlayStation 5.
Your skill has increased.
Like Frosty the Snowman in the Bahamas, some faulty Xbox 360s are literally melting down while running certain games.
Microsoft is facing a potentially huge possible class action lawsuit.
One Xbox has been sent back 3 times.
The red rings are the hottest thing on some Xboxes, literally.
This is how you fix the red ring of death for Xbox. I hope you can refurbish this shit.
For years, Nintendo and Sega had been locked in a mortal battle for supremacy, known as the Console Wars. By undercutting Nintendo on price and targeted ads which claimed the Genesis does what Nintendo doesn't quite have the capability of doing, Sega had just barely clawed their way to the top. At the very first E3 in 1995, Sega sauntered onto the stage with an ego so big it could be seen from space. Their new console, the Saturn, was pitted against the newcomer, Sony's PlayStation. After announcing that the Saturn would be available that very same day, Sega cockily announced the price.
Our retail price is between $399 and $449.
In response, Sony's American president, Steve Race, would take the stage amidst the PlayStation reveal and say to raucous applause,
$299.
On launch, the PlayStation sold more units in 2 days than Sega did in 5 months. Sega no longer makes consoles. In the battle for console supremacy, one mistake can cost your company everything. Fast forward to the early 2000s. Sony has been dominating for years, and Nintendo was close to giving up competing on hardware like they used to and start making consoles named after bodily fluids instead. Microsoft had also splashed onto the scene with a black and green console emblazoned with a logo that looks like a sourdough loaf, which may have been intentional. Unfortunately, the gaming industry couldn't handle more than one shape-themed console, and Nintendo's GameCube was unable to capture the market. This meant that the Xbox's real competition came from Sony's PlayStation 2, following the massive success of the PlayStation 1. The PlayStation 2 had excellent brand recognition. It also had a built-in DVD player, back when those were still expensive, so you could convince your mum that even she could use the PS2 to watch, I don't know, the hot chick on DVD. The Xbox technically played DVDs too, except for the fact that you had to buy a separate remote accessory just so that it would play movies. If only there was some kind of controller that they could, bundle with the console that you could use to navigate menus on a TV. Now, crucially, the PlayStation 2 released a full year before the Xbox, giving them plenty of time to build momentum. The numbers really are quite staggering in retrospect. The PS2 had a much longer lifespan than the others, only being discontinued in 2013, and it's no surprise why. It sold like hotcake handjobs, totaling around 155 million units sold, while the Xbox managed to outsell Nintendo, which is no small feat for a newcomer. I mean, a dead rat in a gutter would have outsold the GameCube. Wow. Microsoft learned a lot from their first console and had the endless money needed to take a loss to Sony on the chin because, they're Microsoft. Even so, the Bill Gates Express wasn't content with their second place standing in the console wars. They wanted to be on top, and they knew just how they'd do it. Microsoft's next console, known only as the Xenon, the next Xbox, or the imaginatively titled Xbox 2, had to be out first. Sure, they would still attempt to make a quality product and nab some more exclusive titles to swing the public over, but the next box had to be out before the PlayStation 3. With development only starting in 2003 and a holiday 2005 release date as their goal, the team had a near impossible task ahead of them. They would have to think outside the Xbox, cut corners like it's crunch time at the Circle Factory, and pray that nothing went wrong. War Thunder? War Thunder is the most comprehensive vehicle combat game ever made. Square off against up to 7.88 billion real people, using over 2,000 tanks, planes, choppers, ships, and a 1986 Toyota Corolla in exciting combined arms PvP battles. From quick thrills to slower tactical campaigns, War Thunder's immersive PvP battles cater to all playstyles and experiences, but only if you're 12 years and older.
Peggy 12.
good thing too, as the vehicles suffer real damage to their highly detailed individual components, crews, and feelings. With an X-ray mode so gory, I can't even bring myself to show you. It's like the Mortal Kombat of tanks. I'm always a huge sucker for anything customizable in video games, so I love the fact that you can tweak everything from the camos, decals, even the bushes. All new players, or those who haven't played in over 6 months, can claim a huge bonus pack for a limited time by using my link in the description. Play War Thunder now for free on PC, Mac, Linux, Xbox One, Xbox Series X, Xbox Series S, PlayStation 4, and PlayStation 5. In May of 2005, Microsoft announced their next console, the Xbox 360. Not at E3, mind, but on a flashy, overproduced, painfully 2000s broadcast on MTV, hosted by Elijah Wood with musical performances by The Killers, which take up about 50% of the broadcast. There were appearances by Lil Jon, Tony Hawk, Sway, and the guys from Pimp My Ride, who pimped out an original Xbox. The best way to describe the entire thing is confused more than anything. Like, the producers at MTV were terrified that gaming was still too nerdy for their normal viewer base. So for every 10 seconds of actual console information, there's 5 minutes of musical interludes and celebrity interviews that had nothing to the reveal. The actual nerdy reveal occurred later that month at E3 2005. The team had learned a lot from the original Xbox, namely to make a controller designed for human-sized hands. The 360 had a whopping 512 megabytes of RAM, a beefy hard drive, in a time when everyone was used to memory cards, and they finally figured out that DVDs could be controlled by the controller that everyone already knew how to control. This controller wouldn't be the only piece of hardware slimmed down from the previous Xbox, as the box itself also went on the Jenny Craig diet, featuring sultry curves that made it the first fuckable console. This meant that space was at a premium, forcing the poor power supply out into the cold. Temperature was also a major concern, with the components so tightly packed together. Achieving good airflow to combat overheating would be a challenge which almost cost them everything. The 360 launches and it goes ballistic. This was largely thanks to their $399 price point, the great library of launch titles, and the fact that it was just a great console. But crucially, they were also first. Not only had Microsoft's mad dash to the finish line put them ahead of the competition, Sony's own hubris all but handed the reins over to Xbox. In 1995, Sega had cockily taken the stage and announced their new console, only to be blindsided by the plucky underdog, PlayStation. 10 years later, Sony cockily took to the stage to announce their new console, the PlayStation 3, stating that the next console generation doesn't start until they say so. The presentation is infamous for one reveal in particular: the price. Like Sega had done all those years ago, Sony incorrectly assumed that brand loyalty would overcome any price point and dropped the console at $499 for a 20GB model or $599 for the 60GB model. Microsoft was ecstatic. Not only was their console out a full year before Sony's, but the outrageously high price would turn away all but the most diehard Sony fans and the US Air Force. Everything was coming up Bellhouse, but there was something lurking in the background. You see, in their mad dash to get the 360 out in time, there were a few issues with the console's design. To Microsoft, their desire to beat Sony outweighed whatever problems might arise from these flaws. Of course, had they known the actual scale of the problem, they never would have sent it out to production. At the height of the 360's popularity, one console was coming off the factory line every 4 seconds, yet only around 50% of these newly birthed consoles actually worked. For comparison, a normal production run would expect a 90 to 95% success rate. Unable to sell these broken consoles, Microsoft instead shipped them to a warehouse that they referred to as the Bone Pile. At one point, this bone pile had over 500,000 broken units that they hoped to one day fix and sell, if not for one problem: they had no idea what was wrong. They weren't sure if there was a fault in the manufacturing process, the design of the silly little box, or even the testing methods they use to determine if a machine works. But hey, at least the other half of them works, so that's something, right? Several months after the 360's launch, people began to report issues with their console. These sabotaged systems were afflicted with one ailment in particular, a red ring flanking the power button. These rings, usually used to indicate how many controllers are plugged in, would turn red when there was an error. Depending on the amount of rings, a different error would be represented, but the most infamous one was 3 red rings, a general hardware failure. This error indicated that something internally is so fucked that it couldn't even spit out an error message on your TV and only had the wherewithal to light up the 3 LEDs. This quickly became known as the Red Ring of Death, a play on the equally infamous blue screen of death from Microsoft's other failed game console, the PC. The name Red Ring of Death always bothered me because it's more like a 3/4 of a ring of death. Ironically, the full Red Ring of Death is actually a pretty minor issue that usually just means your AV cable isn't plugged in properly. In the early days, Microsoft swept these reports under the rug, either maliciously to protect their brand, or because they had no idea how widespread the problem was. Immediately following the console's release, they claimed that it had the industry standard failure rate of around 3 to 5%. When you ignore the literal graveyard of stillborn Xboxes piling up in some Taiwanese warehouse, this might not have been a lie. After all, it took several months of use for the Red Ring of Death to appear. But over time, it became apparent that it wasn't if your console would brick, but when. By April of 2007, around a year and a half after the 360's release, Microsoft's VP of Entertainment, Peter Moore, refused to comment on failure rates when questioned. This problem, once ominously looming in the distance like a Twitch streamer standing across the road from a middle school, was now barreling towards them at worrying speed. And according to Microsoft, they still had no idea what the problem was. Desperate fans who didn't want to go a day without racking up that sweet gamer score would turn to the internet for a variety of homebrew remedies. Tips included wrapping your 360 in towels and then letting it run for 20 minutes. A fire extinguisher would be nice if you feel the need. You might want to use it. While this may solve the problem, it might only last a few more hours before showing the Red Ring of Death again. Buying a repair kit for $30, which would almost certainly void your warranty if it didn't work. The only homebrew solution that actually managed to fix the Red Ring of Death was posted by the YouTuber How To Basic, but even this required a lot of equipment and know-how and wasn't doable for most users. The most common remedy was to suck shit. A majority of the troubleshooting guides hit you with the "I'm sorry but you've only got 30 days left to live" stare, informing you to contact Microsoft to have it repaired or start working double shifts to afford a PlayStation, which was also Sony's advice, by the way. The process of sending off your Xbox was hardly ideal either. After a no doubt riveting time on hold to Microsoft support, they would ship out a regular box for you to put your Xbox in, affectionately dubbed cardboard coffins by gamers. These little cards would then take anywhere from a few days to a few weeks to be spat on by Xbox technicians and returned, and even then, there was no guarantee it wouldn't break again. Other fans, frustrated at Microsoft for selling a defective product, attempted their own repairs. The situation was dire behind the scenes, with the bone pile only getting bigger and the cause of the Red Ring of Death still a mystery. The team had to do something. They made the difficult decision to shut down production of the Xbox 360 until they could figure out what the issue was once and for all. Of course, this only solved the problem for unborn future Xboxes, but did nothing for the millions of defective consoles that had illegally crossed the Mexican border, taking jobs from hard-working, reliable consoles. Were they to cover the repairs for those units, the cost of shipping, repairs, extending the warranties, and government-mandated apology kisses wouldn't be cheap. Their financial department estimated it would cost around $1.15 billion, but doing nothing would cost them even more. The entire Xbox brand. Peter Moore was to meet with Steve Ballmer, Microsoft's energetic CEO, and deliver him the bad news.
He said, "What's it going to cost?" And I remember taking a deep breath, looking at Robbie and going, "We think it's $1.15 billion, Steve." He said, "Do it."
Only a few months after Peter Moore refused to comment on failure rates, he put out an open letter addressing the issue.
To our Xbox community, you've spoken, and we've heard you. Good service and a good customer experience are areas of the business that we care deeply about. And frankly, we've not been doing a good enough job. If a customer has an issue indicated by the 3 flashing red lights, Microsoft will repair the console free of charge, including shipping, for 3 years from the console's purchase date. I want to thank you, on behalf of all us at Microsoft, for your loyalty. Fuck, my nuts are so fucking itchy, bro. Does anyone have any talcum powder? Oh, what? The speech-to-text is still going? It hasn't gone out, has it? Oh, okay. It only goes out when I say send.
This move is widely credited with saving the Xbox brand. Although the experience of sending off your Xbox was far from a pleasant one, the fact it was fully covered by Microsoft at least gave gamers the impression that they were doing something. Besides, people were hooked. Your only options as a console gamer were the Wii, which seemed more focused on catering to people who laugh at Facebook memes, or the PS3. Sony's BlackBrick had yet to recover from its excessive price, bizarre marketing strategy, and infamously poor range of exclusives at launch. So you've probably spent this whole video wondering what the Red Ring of Death actually was. After years of silence, mostly because Microsoft themselves had no idea, they finally revealed its cause in 2021. In order to meet European regulations surrounding lead in products, Microsoft and their merry band of cohorts were forced to swap to a lead-free solder for their electronic parts. These solders connect the circuits on electrical components, making them crucial to the operation of the machine. The problem with removing lead from the equation is that the replacement alloy is nowhere near as flexible or tasty. This means, in an environment like the 360s, the constant fluctuations in temperature from being turned off and on again would cause the metal to expand and contract, like bending a piece of plastic or a Subway sandwich back and forth. Eventually, it would snap. The 360's original sleek, compact design left little room for solid airflow, which only exacerbated its heating issues. Now, it's possible that this wasn't exclusively because of the 360's rushed design, and instead thanks to good old-fashioned money grubbing. The broken solders primarily occurred in the graphics chip, one that Microsoft opted to design in-house instead of contracting an external vendor. This move might have saved them $10 million up front, only to cost them $1.15 billion down the line. Of course, the 360's rush design was still at fault for a myriad of issues outside the Red Ring of Death. While the Red Ring of Death was responsible for the majority of 360 meltdowns, its other malfunctions still occurred at a rate higher than both the PS3 and the Wii. Later versions of the 360 redesigned the internal components to allow for much greater airflow, which drastically reduced the likelihood of a Red Ring of Death. With Microsoft poised to release these new versions of the 360, as well as the groundbreaking launches of Halo 3 and Gears of War right around the corner, the future was bright for the console that almost didn't make it. So the next time you go to say that Xbox sucks or that Bill Gates should stop buying up farmland, spare a thought for the poor multinational billion-dollar corporations who are just barely getting by. Oh, also the PlayStation 3 ended up winning. Hey, don't forget to check out War Thunder for free on PC, Xbox, and PlayStation by using my link below. For a limited time, new players or those who haven't played in 6 months can claim multiple premium vehicles, 7 days of premium account, and much more. A huge thanks to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Hey, if you like this video, check out this one about Bethesda and their mini scandals.
So, got to give some credit here. We have the most expensive mistake in video game history. This was many kudos. Great vid, really funny, made me laugh. 8.1K, he's doing pretty good. 88.1K, I followed him, and I subbed to his channel. Next, we have the bizarre state of Will Smith's career. I have liked and subbed to his channel, Captain Midnight. I've already subbed to him before, but I don't remember him. But anyways, 4.9K. Let's see what he says.
This video is brought to you by Brilliant. On June 15th, 2023, Will Smith's official YouTube channel uploaded a video called Undawn: How Not to Get Annihilated by Zombies, the second of his 2 ads for some kind of free-to-play zombie game. In the video, he riffs on different weapons in the game for 4.5 minutes on a post-apocalyptic garage set. It's kind of a bizarre watch, honestly. Not that it's unusual to see actors do ads or anything, especially these days, but it was still a little strange to see from the guy who spent so many years as perhaps the biggest star in all of Hollywood. But years like 2007, when Will Smith could single-handedly power I Am Legend to massive success at the box office, are long behind us. And even though he successfully won an Oscar in a prestige biopic, I think his career was in an interesting state of flux even before the slap and all the endless online commentary on his marriage. And that's what I want to talk about this week. Not the slap itself or the celebrity gossip about his personal life, which honestly I'm very tired of, but Will Smith, the actor. Because to me, that's far more interesting. Because as much as I've seen him in the news for the past year, not much of it has been about the current state of his film career. Before I really get into it though, I will say I am recording from the road, so if my audio sounds a little different this week, that would be why.
Just think, the person that uses the head can always defeat the person that's just trying to use the hand. Now remember that, because the more you know.
4 years ago, I made a video called The Great and Frustrating Career of Will Smith, where I said that Smith has always been one of my favorite actors. The guy is a charisma powerhouse with a lot more range than I think he's often given credit for, but I also said that he tends to play it very safe with his choice of roles.
People have such bad taste. I'm terribly sorry, but they do. People have such fucking bad taste. Like, I'm sorry, are we talking about the Bad Boys guy here from the Fresh Prince? Sure, he had some good range, you know, a couple stinkers like AI and, you know, Wild West, the worst movie ever made. Or, like, boy, he had some stinkers. Now, I liked Hitch, and I thought, like, Book of Eli was at least, or no, was that him? I can't remember. One of them was, like, or I Am Legend or whatever it was. I forget which one it is. I think it's I Am Legend, yeah. I Am Legend was okay. I am not the biggest Will Smith fan, and if you look at the titles that I cited, you'll understand why. And I liked Men in Black because he was good in it, and he really was very good in Men in Black. He was. But I still think most of the rest of the cast kind of carried him, from Rip Torn on down to Tommy Lee Jones. And I guess that kind of sounds like a white thing, but I'm not trying to get into a race thing. I'm saying the cast that he worked with, of course, they were seasoned Hollywood actors, but I think Men in Black was really good because of the other, Linda Fiorentino and all this. There was other really good people in there. You know, Will Smith, when I think of actors being good, Will Smith does not fit that bill for me. I guess just because he per capita had like 30 movies that people liked, I guess they just think he's a really good actor. But I think they actually just like those movies that he's in, not him. He was dumb and schlocky in Bad Boys. He was dumb and schlocky and kind of like sort of misogynist a bit. He was like dumb and schlocky in Men in Black. He was dumb and schlocky in Fresh Prince. I thought Martin Lawrence was a really fucking good actor. I really actually did think that Martin Lawrence was a good actor. I did not think Will Smith was, and I'm sorry. I realize that's your favorite actor or whatever, but I mean, that's my opinion about that. Will Smith's a great actor, but I don't like a lot of his movies. So, whatever.
Maybe too safe. It's been
I guess I'm just far too art house. I'm too art house. I'm too art house to like worship Will Smith, you know? Like, I'm sorry, like, I'd rather worship, like, what's her name from Parks and Rec? Little art house girl. I can't think of her name. But yeah, I would like her or Olivia Wilde or somebody like that more. You know, I don't know.
Interesting to see his fellow 90s and 2000s mega film stars navigate the current film landscape. Some, like Leonardo DiCaprio, have mostly retreated from the blockbuster space, carving out a career of often great films with beloved directors. Others have set up successful franchises for themselves, like Keanu Reeves with John Wick, or even an older star like Denzel Washington, whose Equalizer films may not be on the same level as Wick, but have proved very reliable for Denzel, and, at least I think, have actually improved with every installment. This has allowed all three of those actors to more or less keep doing what they want, without becoming a cog in someone else's franchise machinery. Now, Will Smith never really went down either of those paths, outside of Bad Boys, which took a huge break but now seems to be roaring back to life. Men in Black was very dependent on his chemistry with Tommy Lee Jones, and then was taken away from them in the terrible Men in Black International.
Your
Same
skill
with
has increased.
Independence Day 2. I still can't believe they tried to make another Independence Day without Will.
Now, Independence Day was a really good fucking movie because of Jeff Goldblum and all the supporting actors in that cast that were actually extremely fucking good. And Will Smith really was a good action star. He's like a genuinely good. I'm talking like up there with Bruce Willis, like totally good action star. But you guys really seem to want Will Smith to be this like hitch guy, like a Jim Carrey type, like he's a comedian gone action guy gone Jim Carrey type, like, you know, drama. But he's not that deep. Where his real strength was action movies. Now, I liked Fresh Prince. I liked everything he ever did. But I don't think he was that good of an actor. I would say action was his thing. We really want to give him credit for Independence Day, but wasn't the real star the Aliens? I'm sorry. But, I mean...
Will Smith. Awful idea. But yeah, pure action vehicles like the very technically impressive Gemini Man also failed to connect with audiences, which to be fair was from the often great director Ang Lee. He also did an animated movie with Spies in Disguise, which was definitely greeted with a shrug, and maybe as the result of not having something like Wick or Equalizer, we've seen Smith take roles like Deadshot in Suicide Squad, which was quickly shunted aside and rebooted without him, and the live-action Aladdin, which was actually a huge hit, but obviously more of the credit there was...
I liked him in Aladdin. I thought he was very, very funny. He's good for kids. He's a great actor, but I mean, he's an action movie actor. I'm never going to say he's a good actor. He's good at flexing his muscles, and he's good at making us laugh, and he's a very strong male role. You know, I got a lot of really nice, glowing things to say about him, but the man's an action actor and a kids movie actor. I don't think I want to see him in dramas. I don't think he was ever that good. I think of him as the Bad Boys guy and the Independence Day guy. Those are action movies.
Given to the property rather than Smith himself. I think I've said in the past that one of his more overlooked films is 2015's Focus with Margot Robbie. Sure, it's nothing overly ambitious, but it's a rock-solid crime caper film that gets a lot of mileage out of the charisma of its stars. I feel like if that hadn't completely gone unnoticed and had been marketed better, probably with a title that wasn't so nothing, it could have provided Smith with the kind of franchise stability that other older stars have found. I know I'd show up for more slick Will Smith con job movies. So those are his recent-ish popcorn films, and aside from some box office bright spots like Bad Boys for Life and Aladdin, it hasn't been super smooth sailing. I mean, I guess I didn't even get to Bright, the orc cop movie on Netflix, which, yeah, anyway.
Bright sucked.
Box office hits aren't everything, right? So what about his smaller, more personal projects? You know, the prestige or art house stuff. Well, this is where I think Smith or Smith's team has never quite had the taste in scripts that some of his contemporaries have. He did win an Oscar last year, so clearly before things completely went off the rails, they were doing something right. I don't think King Richard is anything all that special, honestly, as far as these kind of glossy biopics go, but he did do a great job in a film that felt like it was designed in a lab to win him an Oscar. That's the thing with Will Smith. I feel like when he's called upon to stretch his performance outside of the usual charming movie star persona, he is good at it. He absolutely has the chops, and I think he's demonstrated that time and again. But the smart calculation of King Richard aside, he and his team have been so bad at choosing prestige dramas. 2015's Concussion, a biopic where he starred as a doctor who studied CTE in American football, garnered a really lukewarm reception, including accusations that it had been re-edited to appease the NFL. And honestly, Smith feels a little bit miscast there, even if he does have a few genuinely affecting moments. There's the baffling Collateral Beauty, which I'm sure I touched on last time. It's this dopey magical realism drama with Keira Knightley and Edward Norton that I'm kind of amazed got made in the first place. I want to admire how sincere this thing is, but it's so treacly and lame that I can't even do that. Then last year, there was Emancipation, from the director of Training Day and Olympus Has Fallen, Antoine Fuqua, a really tense historical action movie about an enslaved man on the run in 1863. Now, I actually think this is a more interesting and effectively suspenseful film than it was given credit for at the time, and maybe one of the director's best. Now, a lot of critics don't seem to agree, and between being an Apple Plus original and being completely overshadowed by Smith's personal life, it didn't make much of an impact. I like it though. Something tells me that time will be kind to this one. Or maybe I just overrate any Fuqua project that's halfway decent because I like old school journeyman action directors. I mean, have you seen Southpaw recently? That movie's awesome. Getting back to Smith though, with some rare exceptions, there's something about his choices in non-genre films that have always felt kind of off. And I think in his memoir, Will, we get a glimpse into why that is. Early on in his career, he set out to become the biggest movie star in the world, and to that end, him and his manager created something of a formula for picking movies that would propel him there. He wrote that they studied the box office list of the biggest films of all time, and quote, "What we found is at the center there were always special effects. So it was always special effects, there was always creatures, there was always a love story, so we started looking for movies that had special effects, creatures, and a love story." You can see this exact line of thinking in Men in Black and Independence Day, so obviously they were on to something, at least for a time. But you also see something else in that time period that Smith would rarely do again, working with a very, very high-profile auteur director, Michael Mann, on Ali. Ali has honestly never been one of my favorite Mann movies, but Smith is great in it, and I wish Smith would work with these kind of directors more, in films.
Ali was my favorite work by him. I think that was an exquisite film, and he acted amazingly. I guess that's weird. So I guess he does, but I mean, it was an action film. He mainly played a boxer. It was an action film still. But as far as action films go, that's one of my favorite fucking films for action. So, you know, I liked it more than Rocky. I liked Ali a lot more than Rocky, you know. But then I like black people a lot more than white people, too. So, there we go.
Biopics. Like, I don't know how many people have noticed, but Will Smith has just quietly done so many biopics. In my last video on Smith, I criticized him a bit for turning down the role of Django in Django Unchained after Quentin Tarantino wouldn't let his team do a rewrite on it. And I got a little bit of backlash in the comments for that. In retrospect, yeah, if the ultra-violent movie wasn't the kind of material he connected with or wanted to sign on to because he felt it was too dark or nihilistic, then obviously he shouldn't do the movie. But I think the issue is less Django specifically, and more that he seems very, very reluctant to sign on to anything that wasn't a safe bet that his team had almost complete control over. It's hard to picture Smith in a Chris Nolan, Jordan Peele, or Martin Scorsese movie these days. Even when he worked with M. Night in After Earth, it was at a very low ebb in the director's career, where Smith had the clout to bring in his team and significantly reshape the script. And though it really did not work out there, I do understand that impulse. Will Smith had a very well-crafted movie star persona that was incredibly successful. It only made sense to be protective of that image and try to be very selective about roles that leaned into it in the best light. But, you know, that brings us to today. Between that ill-fated Oscar night and the past couple of years of reporting about Will Smith's personal life, I think it's safe to say that that movie star persona has become far more complicated at best and maybe kind of shattered at worst. That process has been uncomfortable, it's been weird, and I'm sure fairly embarrassing for all involved. But there's a reason I'm not calling this video the end of Will Smith's career or something like that. Because as much as people have mocked and criticized the guy for the past couple of years, I do think there might be a small silver lining to be found here, at least as far as his film work goes. That memoir I mentioned earlier, Will, it might be hard to remember now, but all the articles about that book were making things a little strange for Will Smith far before the slap happened. I read it immediately after release, and I went into it expecting a very manicured, on-brand portrait of him. The kind that you find in a lot of celebrity autobiographies like this. And what I got instead was far more raw and personal. And sure, I don't doubt that even that was calculated to a certain degree by a PR team trying to win an Oscar, but there was something genuinely unflattering and uncomfortable about some of the stories in there. And I came away from it thinking that Will Smith was ready to move on from the brand of Will Smith. The light, family-friendly entertainer of Parents Just Don't Understand and Men in Black who is always up for some fun, wholesome laughs and action. And now, for better or worse, that image has been changed forever. How that happened was, not great, but I think now that he doesn't have that very precise image to maintain, why not try to get more artistically daring with his career? Why not take a great lead or even supporting role in a Paul Thomas Anderson or Bong Joon-ho film? Or seek out exciting younger talent that would have a hard time getting financed without his name and place his trust in them. At this point, really, what is there to lose? Why not take some bold film role risks that the Will Smith of 2005 never would have on the big screen? Speaking of 2005, have you ever heard of Will Smith's hip-hop album that came out that year, Lost and Found? After the slap, I remember a lot of people online discovering how strange and kind of angry that album was. Like the weird Will Smith of 2022 had been hiding in plain sight all along and no one noticed. The thing is, though, I wasn't shocked by Lost and Found. I knew that album very, very well. Because in 2005, I was a weird homeschooled kid in 7th grade that was listening to Will Smith instead of Kanye or T.I. I just liked The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and iRobot that much, I guess. I was 12, okay? But one thing that comes through very clear in Lost and Found is Smith's insecurity about not being accepted by his hip-hop peers. It's all over that album, recognizable to me even as a kid. And I would say that sense of insecurity applied to everything is felt throughout his memoir as well. And look, I'm just about the last person who's going to weigh in on if he was actually a talented rapper or not. I don't feel especially qualified to do that. I will say unequivocally that I think he can be a great actor, beyond just Will Smith, the movie star brand. And even though his next movie is another Bad Boys film, which is probably a safe career choice after the past few years he's had, I do think there's so much left unexplored for him as an actor and an artist, separate from chasing the dream of being the biggest movie star in the world. We see glimpses of it in movies like Pursuit of Happiness and I Am Legend, and I want to see that on screen and in the hands of filmmakers.
Pursuit of Happiness was really, really good. It's weird. I think I actually like his dramas. I think they're good. But also, I don't think Pursuit of Happiness was good because of him. I think it was good because of the writer. Kind of like Eternal Sunshine. I don't think Eternal Sunshine was particularly good because of Jim Carrey, though it is one of like a top 5 film for me. I think it was good because of Charlie Kaufman, And it's every time, it's weird, these main actors, they're given credit for other people's work all the time, like directors and writers and shit, aliens and cosplay and makeup and stuff, and I don't know, that's a lot of pressure. I feel like it's unfortunate for them to feel like they have to live up to Independence Day just because the aliens in Independence Day or Men in Black were so good that that people want more of Will Smith, right? They think, I want more Will Smith because he was in Independence Day and Men in Black, but really it's the aliens. It's the action. I think Pursuit of Happiness was a very well written story about the drive of a young professional, how really all encompassing it can be. And it was a very good movie, but I don't think it was good because of Will Smith. I think it was good because of the writer. Kind of like Eternal Sunshine. Jim Carrey knocked Eternal Sunshine out of the fucking park. I'm talking really well, but it's still Charlie Kaufman's baby. Or is it Charlie? Yeah, Charlie Kaufman, I think, wrote that. Yeah, that's still Kaufman's baby. It was Kaufman's baby is what made it so good. It was such a good story about erasing your memory after a bad breakup. It was such a good story.
Who can mold your skill has increased. And exciting. Will Smith has already been the biggest movie star in the world. In the past decade or so, has felt like him desperately trying to climb back to that before suddenly and violently closing that chapter of his life forever. How he went about that was bizarre and I think pretty clearly a mistake, but it also sets up a potential new chapter. And as someone who has always really liked the guy's work and followed his films closely, I hope ultimately it can be a worthwhile one. You probably never won an Oscar the same night you did the weirdest stuff.
Your skill has increased.
Maybe you're also looking for a new chapter. Okay, that transition was pretty bad, but seriously, Brilliant is not. Brilliant helps you tackle science, math, and computer science concepts like AI and neural networks in incredible ways that always fit into your schedule. Even if you can only spare 15 minutes a day on a tablet, computer, or even your phone. One that's really worth looking into is exploring data visually, which gives you a solid foundation in data analysis with super helpful visualizations. There are thousands of lessons. The United States.
Your skill has increased.
My mic's been on.
and Taiwan have always maintained a complicated relationship.
Okay, so the next one is real life lore. I've liked and subbed to his channel. How the US and China are preparing to fight total war. Brand new video came out 15 hours ago.
Taiwan's official name is the Republic of China, or ROC. The government that was initially established all the way back in 1912 across mainland China following the collapse of the imperial Qing dynasty. The ROC was subsequently one of America's top allies during the Second World War, fighting against the Japanese in the Asia-Pacific theater. But following the conclusion of that war, the Chinese nationalist government of the ROC almost immediately resumed its long-standing civil war against the Chinese communists. By 1949, the communists had emerged victorious in the mainland of China and proclaimed the People's Republic of China, or the PRC. But the nationalist government of the ROC continued to survive and fled from the mainland to Taiwan, where they have remained at ever since. Both governments, the ROC and the PRC alike, never agreed on any kind of formal peace treaty and have remained officially at war with one another ever since, with both sides continuing to officially claim on paper to be the sole legal government of all of China ever since, meaning that the Chinese Civil War never really ended in any official capacity, and has remained frozen for the 74 years of history that have followed ever since 1949. The United States had been among the very first countries in the world to recognize the ROC government back when it was first established in mainland China in 1912. And after the retreat to Taiwan in 1949, the United States continued recognizing the ROC as the sole legitimate government of all of China for decades. And in order to deter the larger communist PRC on the mainland from ever launching an invasion of Taiwan to defeat the ROC once and for all, the US provided economic and military aid to the ROC government, and the ROC welcomed thousands of US troops to bases themselves on the island, which peaked in the year 1958 when nearly 20,000 US troops were stationed on the island. And it wasn't just American troops on Taiwan either. The US Air Force activated an entire air division that they headquartered in Taiwan, while the US even deployed some of their own nuclear weapons to the island as well. And in 1955, the US even signed a mutual defense pact with the ROC, promising to intervene militarily on their behalf if the PRC ever launched a cross-strait invasion, which all firmly deterred the PRC from ever considering such an invasion for decades. In fact, the ROC themselves in Taiwan, still determined to reclaim the Chinese mainland by force throughout the entire Cold War, offered the US to invade the Chinese mainland on multiple occasions throughout the 1950s and 60s. The closest it ever came was in the early 1960s, when in the midst of the Great Chinese Famine that killed tens of millions in the mainland in the PRC's first nuclear weapons test in 1964, the nationalist ROC government believed there was enough instability within the mainland to launch a cross-strait invasion of their own and hoped that millions of disillusioned Chinese mainlanders would end up taking their side. The ROC mobilized hundreds of thousands of troops for this operation and requested direct US support for the invasion of the mainland on multiple occasions, but constant American refusals began forcing them to reconsider. And then in 1965, 3 ROC naval vessels were intercepted by the People's Liberation Army Navy and sunk by torpedoes, killing nearly 300 ROC naval personnel, which convinced the ROC military that they were not as prepared for a cross-strait invasion of the mainland as they had previously thought. All of the invasion plans were shelved. And then in the 1970s, the geopolitical situation for the ROC began to change dramatically. By this point, the PRC and the Soviet Union, the world's 2 largest communist states, were having a massive falling out. In 1969, the Chinese and the Soviets were literally on the brink of war over a series of border disputes and clashes in the Soviet Far East, in which hundreds of soldiers were killed and wounded, and the United States began sensing an opportunity. Washington strategically chose to begin switching its recognition of the nationalist ROC on Taiwan as the sole legitimate government of China to the communist PRC on the mainland, in order to gain the much larger PRC as a fellow ally opposed to the Soviet Union. And in In order to do that, it became necessary for the United States to begin winding down its obvious military support for the ROC on Taiwan. By 1974, the US had removed all of their nuclear weapons from Taiwan, and by 1979, the US had removed all of their troops and equipment from the island as well. America's direct military presence on Taiwan was over, and then, for the first time ever in 1979, the US severed their official diplomatic recognition of the ROC as the government of China, and formally recognized the PRC as the government of China instead. This also meant that by 1980, the US had revoked its mutual defense treaty with the ROC as well, and Washington also stopped giving any economic and military aid to their government. But unofficial connections between the ROC and the US remained. Deprived of free military aid, the ROC switched to directly buying US weapons and arms instead, and the US government was more than happy to continue selling to them. From 1955 to 1980, the official US position on a PRC invasion of Taiwan was very clear. The US would intervene militarily to stop it. But after 1980, the official US position shifted to a policy of deliberate strategic ambiguity. The US would never publicly commit to defending Taiwan from an invasion, but would also never publicly commit to not defending Taiwan from an invasion either. There has never been another formal defense treaty between the ROC and the US ever since the revocation of the original one in 1980. And for decades throughout the 1980s, 90s, and 2000s, this American policy of strategic ambiguity was still enough to deter the PRC from ever considering launching an invasion, as the mere possibility of America's vastly superior military still intervening was enough to make the relatively weaker People's Liberation Army reconsider. Between 1995 and 1996, the PRC fired missiles into all of these zones to the north of Taiwan and carried out military exercises in all of these zones of the Taiwan Strait. And the US military responded by sending 2 separate aircraft carrier battle groups through the Taiwan Strait in a huge show of force to the PRC and a show of support to the ROC. And the PRC chose to back down. But as China's economy began dramatically expanding in scale since the 2000s, so too has China's military and long-dormant geopolitical ambitions. In 1996, during that so-called Third Taiwan Strait crisis, the PRC's annual military spending was only a paltry $14.3 billion, compared to the US military's annual budget of the time at around $288 billion, 20 times the size of the PRC's military budget at the time. But fast forward from then to now, only 27 years later, and the PRC's military budget has exploded by more than 20 times over to more than $293 billion per year now, which is currently equivalent to about a third of America's military spending, as opposed to only about a 20th back in 1996. With the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 and the final resolution of the Sino-Russian land border dispute by treaty in 2003, the PRC's entire northern flank became secure, and a period of relatively friendly relations with Russia has emerged ever since. That freed up the PRC to largely focus on its long-running unresolved maritime disputes with its neighbors instead. Their claims to the Senkaku or Diaoyu Islands that are currently administered by Japan. Their unilateral claims to the entire South China Sea through their so-called Nine Dash Line that directly clashes with the UN-recognized EEZs of Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, and Brunei. And most pressingly of all, their decades-long demand for the ROC on Taiwan to finally surrender and submit to Beijing, finishing the Chinese Civil War once and for all. To better enforce these maritime claims, the PRC spent the later 2000s pouring its defense spending into rapidly building up its naval force, the People's Liberation Army Navy, or PLAN, into a world-class navy. By total number of surface ships, it has since evolved into the largest navy in the world, with a fleet of approximately 350 surface ships and submarines. The PLAN has designed and built 3 of their own modern aircraft carriers, dozens of conventional and nuclear-powered submarines, and constructed naval and airfields across the islands of the South China Sea, all while increasing their rhetoric that Taiwan must be reunified with the mainland again, by any means necessary. And this is all why, ever since the 2010s, the United States has been following its pivot to Asia strategy, which has involved winding down its military engagements in the Middle East and Afghanistan to refocus nearly everything to East Asia instead, with the goal of deterring the PRC from ever launching this invasion of Taiwan that it appears to be preparing for. Even the long-running policy of American strategic ambiguity in regards to a PRC invasion of Taiwan appears to be waning, with Joe Biden, the current president of the United States, publicly stating at least 4 separate times now since he took office that the United States will directly intervene militarily should Beijing choose to invade. And to back up his words, just about every single thing that the US foreign policy establishment and military are doing right now, all around the world, is explicitly being done to counter what the PRC is doing to prepare for its invasion. And just about everything that the PRC is doing is likewise designed to counter everything that the United States is doing. The new Cold War is here, and both Beijing and Washington are preparing themselves to fight a cataclysmic war over the final fate of Taiwan and the future of China that could end up happening before the end of this decade. It is a war that neither Beijing nor Washington truly want, but it is a war that they are both preparing to fight nonetheless. And this is how they are both preparing to do so. For the US, the greatest difficulty of all in confronting China militarily over Taiwan will be overcoming the tyranny of distance. The distance from the US west coast to the Taiwan Strait is more than 6,000 miles across the vast and empty Pacific Ocean, while the Chinese mainland is fewer than 100 miles away from Taiwan. The PRC will thus be able to focus its entire military machine to the singular goal of taking Taiwan, with all of its bases and logistics operating within the same theater, whereas the US will simply not have this same geographic advantage. To compensate for that, the United States has long adopted a geographic strategy to confront the PRC, known as the first and second island chains. The first island chain, in theory, begins within South Korea. While not an island in a geographic sense, South Korea still effectively functions as an island anyway because of its completely locked down border to the north, with North Korea that nothing is ever allowed to travel across. The US has permanently maintained a very large troop presence in South Korea ever since the Cold War in order to deter the North Koreans from ever launching an invasion, and to also conveniently have troops nearby to China and Taiwan. Currently, the US military operates several bases across the country with about 22,000 total troops being present, including 2 US Air Force bases at Osan and Kunsan on the South Korean west coast on the Yellow Sea, immediately opposite from China, both of which have dozens of F-16 fighters based at them that are easily within range of flashpoints in the Taiwan Strait, the East China Sea, and the Yellow Sea. Moreover, the South Korean government has recently made it clear that they will ask the US to bring back American nuclear weapons to the country as well, something the United States pulled out from South Korea back in 1991 at the end of the last Cold War, but are likely going to be returning again soon. Extending from South Korea, the next component of America's first island chain then runs through Japan, where the US has maintained a very significant military presence ever since the end of World War II. Today, in 2023, at any given time, there are around 50,000 US troops deployed to Japan across dozens of different bases all across the country, which now represents America's biggest overseas deployment of troops anywhere in the world. The single largest concentration of US forces in Japan today, however, is not anywhere within the Japanese main islands, but on the relatively small Japanese island of Okinawa, which is one of the most heavily militarized islands anywhere in the world. Following World War II, the US directly governed Okinawa and all the other small islands in the Ryukyu island chain until they were returned to Japan in 1972. And Okinawa in particular was built up as, essentially, a massive unsinkable American aircraft carrier in the Pacific fewer than 400 miles away to Taiwan. Still today, approximately 25% of all the land in Okinawa is covered by US military bases, and there's around 26,000 US troops who are deployed to the island, more than all of the US troops in South Korea, and a bit more than half of all the US troops deployed to Japan. Okinawa is also the site of the US Air Force's largest and most active base in all of East Asia, Kadena Air Base, which is also home to the US Air Force's 18th Wing, the largest active combat wing in the entire Air Force, home to bombers, helicopters, reconnaissance craft, and fighters, including brand new cutting-edge F-35s that are steadily being moved into the base to replace the older F-15s. As Kadena is only about 500 miles away from the Taiwan Strait, the base's fighters and bombers are easily within range of launching sorties out to intercept advancing Chinese ships and planes during an invasion scenario. And together with the US Air Force's other bases in South Korea, they can easily cooperate together to battle for air superiority over the narrow Korea Strait and ideally block China's warships from being able to break out and expand the war into the Sea of Japan. Moreover, the US also maintains its only permanently forward-deployed carrier strike group homeported at Yokosuka, in Japan's Tokyo Bay, Carrier Strike Group 5, the flagship of which is the USS Ronald Reagan, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered supercarrier that can carry 90 fixed-wing and helicopter aircraft. Accompanying the Ronald Reagan Carrier Strike Group 5 in Yokosuka are an additional 3 Ticonderoga-class cruisers and 7 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, which make it the US Navy's largest carrier strike group currently in service, and which is, naturally, very close to the Ryukyu island chain in Taiwan. Meanwhile, the first island chain continues southwestwards from Okinawa through the other small Japanese islands of Miyakojima, Tarama, Ishigaki, Takatomi, and Yonaguni, the latter of which is fewer than 70 miles away from Taiwan. All of these islands are tiny and remote from the rest of Japan, but they are becoming significantly more strategically valuable, as all eyes begin being focused on Taiwan, including Japan's. In 2022, amidst the Russian invasion of Ukraine and fearful of increasing Chinese and North Korean strategic moves in East Asia, the Japanese government announced an unprecedented plan to remilitarize and expand defense spending to levels never before seen since the Second World War. The Japanese Defense Ministry has now requested a budget of nearly $53 billion for 2024, which will put the Japanese self-defense forces on about a par with the defense spending of France. In its 2022 National Security Strategy Report, Japan clearly identified China as its, quote, greatest strategic challenge. Consequently, Japan is investing its new upgraded defense spending into anti-ship and anti-air missiles radar systems, and newer, more advanced fighters and ships. And part of this remilitarization is being focused on building up the Japanese self-defense forces' presence on the southern Ryukyu Islands extending from Okinawa down to Yonaguni, transforming them into tiny Japanese fortresses. Japan first began militarizing these small islands back in 2016, when they constructed a small outpost on the island of Yonaguni with only 160 troops to conduct coastal surveillance. In 2019, the Japanese built 2 more bases, in Miyakojima and further north in Omami-Oshima, both of which were armed with surface-to-air air and surface-to-ship missiles. And now in 2023, the Japanese are deploying 570 troops to Ishigaki, along with more surface-to-air and surface-to-ship missiles, with even further discussions on extending even more surface-to-air and surface-to-ship missiles and troops to Yonaguni as well. Unlike Joe Biden's repeatedly firm statements on American support for Taiwan's sovereignty, no Japanese government officials have ever publicly stated that Tokyo would actually come to Taiwan's aid militarily as well. Nonetheless, if the Chinese invasion of Taiwan does take place and the US decides to intervene, it's easy to see how the Japanese could end up being dragged into it anyway, especially if Chinese attacks were to happen against US military targets in Okinawa on sovereign Japanese territory. If Tokyo and Washington cooperated together to stop China's invasion fleet then, their primary objective would be to lock down the Ryukyu island chain and deny the PLAN from being able to break through out of the East China Sea and flank Taiwan's critical east coast from the north. The east coast of Taiwan is of the utmost importance to the ROC and the Americans during this potential invasion scenario, because Taiwan is geographically divided into two separate halves by a massive chain of towering mountains that run through the island's interior. The western side of Taiwan is wider, flatter, and directly exposed across the Taiwan Strait to the Chinese mainland, making it the most obvious target for the bulk of the PRC's invasion fleet to target. The eastern side of Taiwan, between the ocean and the mountains, is far narrower, more surrounded by rough mountainous terrain, separating it from the west and opposite of the Chinese mainland, meaning that the east will serve as the ROC's primary rear base of operations during an invasion scenario, and it will be the final line of defense where Allied troops deciding to militarily intervene can land at to help turn the tide of battle, like the Americans and Japanese, denying the PRC any ability to flank Taiwan from the north or the south, and getting around to attacking this vital rear base in the east of Taiwan is thus of the utmost importance to American military planners. The northern component of the first island chain, consisting of all of America's military assets in South Korea, Japan, and Okinawa, along with Japan's military assets in the southern Ryukyu Islands, are thus designed as the northern pincer of Taiwan's outside defense. It restricts China's flexibility of movement during an invasion scenario from getting around to attack Taiwan's east coast from the north, and it limits them into attacking in a more predictable, straightforward frontal assault on Taiwan's more exposed west coast directly opposite of the Chinese mainland. But in theory, that still leaves the possibility of the PLAN moving to the south instead and flanking Taiwan's critical eastern shore anyway through the wider Bashi Channel that separates Taiwan from the northern Philippine island of Luzon. But of course, the US is preparing extensively for this situation as well, with the next component of its first island chain strategy, the southern pincer coming up from the Philippines. The US and the Philippines, similarly to the US and Japan, have a long and complicated history. The US directly seized the Philippines from Spain back in 1898 and transformed them into a colony that lasted for decades until after the end of World War II in 1946. But even after the Philippines were given independence, the US continued maintaining a huge military presence across the country for decades afterward throughout the Cold War, just like they did in Japan and also in Taiwan itself for a while. America's most significant military bases in the country that remained were an Air Force base at Clark Air Base and a naval base at Subic Bay, which were literally the largest overseas U.S. military facilities for a lot of the Cold War, owing to their strategic location nearby to both Vietnam and to the Taiwan Strait. Dozens of U.S. ships and submarines were present in Subic Bay for decades, but then in 1991, two separate events happened. The Soviet Union began disintegrating, and with it, the Cold War wrapping up, and in the same year, Mount Pinatubo, only 20 miles away from Subic Bay and only 9 miles away from Clark Air Base, exploded in the second largest volcanic eruption of the entire 20th century, with a force that was 8 times greater than the Mount St. Helens eruption. The eruption virtually destroyed Clark Air Base outright and buried Subic Bay beneath a foot of ash, which caused massively extensive damage. Before that eruption, the U.S. was negotiating with the government of the Philippines on renewing their lease to both Clark and Subic Bay for $850 million a year. But after the eruption took out Clark and severely damaged Subic Bay, the U.S. lowered the offer to only $250 million a year to renew the lease, which the Philippines refused. Clark was evacuated and returned to the Philippines in 1991, while Subic Bay was decommissioned and returned to the Philippines as well the following year in 1992. And with it, the U.S. military presence in the Philippines was ended for the very first time in nearly a century, which further marked the first time since the 16th century that no foreign military forces were present in the Philippines at all. For the next couple of decades, there would continue to be no U.S. military presence in the Philippines until geopolitical events in the 2010s ultimately ended up bringing them back again. In the early 2010s, China began enforcing its 9-dash line across the South China Sea much more aggressively. They began building military outposts on tiny islands within the exclusive economic zone claimed by the Philippines, and laid claims to all of the Spratly Islands and the Scarborough Shoal that the Philippines also claimed. Chinese warships began patrolling the area and sometimes firing water cannons at Philippine fishing vessels and ordering them to leave from the area. The result is that
Your
the
skill
Philippines
has
began
increased.
feeling threatened by China's maritime expansionism in the South China Sea right on their doorstep. So they chose to begin upgrading their security relationship with the United States again.
Your skill has
Thus,
increased.
In 2014, the Obama administration and the Philippines signed a 10-year-long pact known as the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which finally allowed the U.S. to return a large-scale military presence to the Philippines once again. 5 Philippine military bases in the country were opened up to joint control with
Your
the
skill
U.S.
has
military,
increased.
and American troops began being stationed at them in 2016. After 24 years of absence, U.S. military bases were back in the Philippines again, and more would follow shortly. In 2023, the Philippines and the U.S.
Your
announced the
skill has
creation of 4
increased.
additional joint Philippine-U.S. military bases in the country under the original terms of the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, which will bring the total number of American military bases in the Philippines to at least up to 9. I say at least because there are even further discussions happening right now between the Philippines and the U.S. to reactivate the old Cold War-era U.S. naval base at Subic Bay again.
Your skill
While
has
not
increased.
officially happening yet as of the production of this video, the Philippine Navy reoccupied a portion of the base near the end of 2022, while the remainder of the port was acquired by a U.S. private equity firm. If the U.S. Navy returns to Subic Bay again, it would function as an ideal deepwater harbor for some of America's advanced nuclear submarine fleet to station themselves at only a few hundred miles away from the Bashi Channel separating Taiwan from the northern Philippine island of Luzon. But even if the U.S. Navy doesn't do that,
Your
just
skill
look
has
at the
increased.
9 joint U.S.-Philippine military bases that have already been officially agreed upon just since 2014. 2 out of the 5 previously agreed upon bases from 2014 were on the northern island of Luzon, while 3 out of the 4 recently announced bases in 2023 are also concentrated on the same northern island. Regardless if U.S. naval forces also return to Subic Bay or not, this will already place a very high concentration of American troops within Luzon, very close by to Taiwan's southern flank. In March of 2022, it was revealed that American F-22 fighter jets were being deployed to the Philippines for the first time. F-22s in any of these bases on Luzon will be capable of rapidly sortying out during an invasion of Taiwan scenario to attack advancing Chinese warships and airplanes, while U.S. deployed HIMARS rocket artillery systems on the ground placed within the northern reaches of Luzon will have the range to strike everywhere within the Bashi Channel between Luzon and Taiwan, the goal of which will be to obviously block the advancing PLAN from being able to break through the Bashi Channel and flank Taiwan's vulnerable and critical eastern coast. Attacking through the Bashi Channel will be a primary war aim of Beijing's during the invasion, not only to flank Taiwan's east coast, but to also attempt a capture of the extremely important Taiwanese port city of Kaohsiung. Kaohsiung is Taiwan's largest port by far, that all on its own accounts for 62% of all the island's total cargo volume and the majority of its oil volume. Seizing Kaohsiung early on would deny the ROC defenders the ability to import large amounts of supplies, fuel, resources, and reinforcements, and it would enable the PLA to use it instead to keep funneling in more of their own troops, supplies, and fuel to the island instead. American HIMARS placed in the northern reaches of Luzon would be nearly within range of striking the area around Kaohsiung to attack approaching PLAN landing ships, or to deliberately destroy the port facilities themselves if they were to fall into the PLAN's hands. Taken all together, the U.S. military strategy to defend Taiwan during an invasion scenario involves this northern pincer with their bases in South Korea, Japan, and Japan's Ryukyu island chain blocking any ability for the PLAN to advance from China's shores into either the Sea of Japan or out into the Philippine Sea, where they can
Your
be
skill
capable
has
of linking
increased.
Taiwan's critical eastern shore from the northern direction, while the southern pincer with the U.S. military bases in the Philippines is designed to simultaneously deny the PLAN any ability to advance through the Bashi Channel and flank Taiwan's eastern coast from the southern direction. The combined intent is to deny China the flexibility of movement
Your skill
during
has
any
increased.
invasion scenario, and to force them into only being able to choose a single option: a predictable, frontal amphibious assault on Taiwan's well-defended and prepared western beaches, while the east coast remains relatively stable and
Your
safe
skill has
just
increased.
long enough for outside help to be able to arrive and begin turning the tide. But America's first island chain strategy doesn't end in the Philippines. It continues even further down to another island, the smallest one in the entire strategy, but like